one of the things I talk about is content maturity on your roadmap. And going from a maturity of saying, this is the feature we're going to deliver, to, well, maybe these are the problems we're going to solve. But that's only the middle phase for me of the maturity. Actually, I believe that the most mature level is a mixture of content on your roadmap. And that, for example, means that in the short term, maybe we'll use the now, next, and later concept. The short term now, we know what solutions we're going to ship. We know what the features are. There's no problem putting those on a roadmap and communicating it.
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve.
Hello and welcome to the Product Agility Podcast. I am your host, Ben Maynard, and today is a day where we are going to talk about roadmaps and decision making with a gentleman named Phil Hornby, who big on LinkedIn, big on talking about roadmaps. He's got a new book which he's working on. I say new book like Phil's got an old book. Phil has a book that he's working on around decision making, which I think is a fantastic topic. So that's why we've chosen roadmaps and decision making, because roadmaps, I think, is what maybe you've heard Phil talk about. It's what he keynotes about at conferences, and decision making will be his thing, which is going to be focusing over the coming years. So Phil, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's an absolute delight to have you here.
Pleasure being here, Ben.
Now, Phil, we've been talking for a long time before this because I drank too much coffee this morning. Having some choice conversations and trying to decide where we start. And I think, like with most of the episodes we have, it'd be lovely if we could start with an introduction to yourself, a little bit of history, so that our listeners can get a feel for who you are.
Sure. So, well, I guess one way of phrasing it is I'm a player turned coach. I'm an ex-product person who figured that I could help more product people by helping them in that kind of step back kind of coaching model. That means I work independently across many organizations, but my background is building products. Like, I started as an engineer. I am officially a geek, and when I talk about that, I'm talking about a full stack engineer. And I don't just mean you can do back end and front end. I mean, you can design the hardware as well. That's full stack to me. That's what the team that I cut my teeth in could do. And in fact, in that team, there were no product managers. There was no agile. But actually, if I look at how modern product teams work, employing agile practices, that's pretty much what we did. Just there was an engineer actually doing all of those different parts. And so I learned through that crucible and brought that to modern product teams working. And I remember as an ops manager, one point in my career, the whole point was about creating the process to scale how we worked as an organization to codify those ways of working. Going and looking at the waterfall, the Prince2 type models, the ITIL, the new emerging agile kind of methodologies, and saying, okay, there's kind of a fusion here of how we work. We're kind of already doing a lot of this. We just need to codify what it means for us in our organization. And that's kind of been the hallmark of how I've worked. He's like bringing that, I guess, the best practice from out in the world, but also looking at that pragmatic step of what works in this organization. And for the last sort of 6.5 years, I've been independent, helping organizations and individuals do that as a coach and a trainer. As you say, I'm pretty well known for road mapping. I have a channel called Talking Roadmaps, which is full of interviews with the good and the great of the product management world in particular. And yeah, I just started writing a book called It Depends, all about making product decisions in context, because context matters in product decisions and we want to drive outcomes.
Well said. And just thinking about what you said there about context mattering in decisions. I suppose this is where the argument that things are too theoretical comes from, right? Because the theory is often devoid from the context. And the challenge is, how do you apply that theory in the context? And yeah, It Depends is a lovely title for a book. I'm quite taken with that. So I can't wait. What's the timeline you're thinking of to get this out?
So the timeline is middle of 2025. I want to get it out essentially for conference season in that year. So I've given myself about 12 months from now to do it. I started working on it a couple of months ago. I've got an outline sketch. I've got the design for kind of roughly how the flow is going to work. There's a set of core principles, a core kind of rubric in terms of how decision making needs to be approached. Now it's the hard work of actually writing words.
Yeah, writing them is hard. Well, it's not. I mean, it's quite easy. You could just write any old shit, couldn't you? But no.
Indeed.
Writing them so that they are engaging and make sense. That's the art.
Yeah, and so, for example, I'm planning to apply Rob Fitzpatrick's Write Useful Books approach, which basically means there's going to be a chunk of writing in public. I have 90 people in my early readers club already that are going to get access to those first drafts, to give me comments, to give me feedback, to help refine it, because there's no point in me writing it in ivory tower. I need to kind of get it out there. Same with a product. Go and test those assumptions and refine and iterate on.
Yeah. That's been my week, has been having those conversations with Jeff Gotthelf and Josh Scheiden around Lean UX. Because I'll be shortly, I'm now an accredited Lean UX trainer. Go figure.
Cool.
So I'm going to be running Lean UX training.
Re-listening to that book as I run each morning right now.
Oh, really? It's a good book.
It is.
And I think this is one thing I'm really learning from Jeff and Josh, the importance of kind of testing those ideas and how you can go about doing it. And as we mentioned before we started, talk about like jargonization of things, I think, and road mapping. And we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll hit on the jargonization of the term road mapping, because I think it means too many. It's been overloaded to a point. But, talking to Jeff and Josh particularly says the word MVP, or the phrase MVP, which is an initialism, not an acronym. An acronym spells a word. Initialism, it's just letters. Unless MV is a word, which I think is. But MVP just become just such a nonsense term nowadays. It doesn't mean anything practical, which I think for many people is where they are with roadmaps. I think that roadmaps have been with the zeitgeist for a while. Everyone was really into them. Everyone wanted a roadmap, and no one really changed how they were doing things, and ended up just producing a load of old rubbish a lot of the times. And some organisations didn't. I'm not tying everyone with the same brush. And I think one thing I'm curious about is, to start off our conversation, is I do think that certain people in the agile world have really struggled with roadmaps and almost failed to see the point in them, or create roadmaps which maybe don't pass the litmus test. So, Phil, why is it, do you think, that people in the agile space struggle with roadmaps?
I think the fundamental core of it is because it's seen as the plan or a plan. It's seen as, right, this is the plan, we're going to stick to it, we're going to follow this to the letter. It might be a plan, it might be plan A. But the reality is, we know we started working on plan B yesterday. There's nothing wrong in articulating a direction of travel, so long as you're not investing huge amounts of time and effort in that articulation and getting invested and falling into that kind of, I forget which bias it is, but the bias to basically keep paying into that same thing. It's sunk cost fallacy to some extent. Really what we're trying to do is cast that vision. And on the channel we had someone came on and they talked about how he was really, really anti-roadmaps because he knew that things were going to change. The context, the environment was going to change. Yeah, we know that. Everyone who creates a roadmap knows that. Everyone who looks at a roadmap knows that as well, even the customer. But often, in particular in B2B, you want to know that you have a similar view of the direction of travel, a similar view of the future of where things are going. And so having that roadmap to articulate that direction of travel is a powerful tool to drive the conversation. Because a roadmap's not a plan. A roadmap is a communication and alignment artifact. It's about us getting on the same page and understanding that we're going this direction and that we're going to steer along the path. We're going to learn things. Part of the challenge is because they basically end up looking like a Gantt chart. They are, which is not a roadmap. A Gantt chart is a project plan. It shows the activities we're going to do, not the things we're going to actually deliver, or heck, the problems we're going to solve. In fact, one of the things I talk about is content maturity on your roadmap, and going from maturity of saying, this is the feature we're going to deliver, to, well, maybe these are the problems we're going to solve. But that's only the middle phase for me of the maturity. Actually, I believe that the most mature level is a mixture of content on your roadmap. And that, for example, means that in the short term, maybe we'll use the now, next, and later concept. The short term now, we know what solutions we're going to ship. We know what the features are. It's no problem putting those on a roadmap and communicating it. On the other hand, in the next, well, we don't really know what the solutions are. We haven't done the discovery. In fact, we're really doing the discovery there. So let's put the problems that we're trying to understand on there, on the roadmap. And then in the last column, really, we just know the problem space we want to explore in the later. And so that's really exploration and understanding that actually, for us, maybe in the product team, that's easy to think about. But for people outside of the product team, it's quite hard for them to look at, well, in one column you're telling me features, in another column you're telling me something else and something else. And that makes it really hard. But when you get to that level of maturity and that honesty of, we know with certainty here, we are still figuring things out here, and we're frankly just going out searching over here, that helps. I mean, another aspect to it is that we ask the roadmap to do too many jobs. And here I am stealing a quote from John Cutler. If you think about it, we ask it to give us certainty about what's coming when. We ask it to help us align people. We ask it to show which problems we're solving, which outcomes we're driving, which even impact we're going to deliver. All these different jobs, every stakeholder group, every audience looking at your roadmap has a different set of jobs. So one, we expect one view to do everything, and two, we expect to do everything for everybody. The reality is, you probably need a different view for each audience, because each audience cares about different things. Like showing to an exec all the level of detail that you're going to talk about and align with the development team is not going to go very well. On the other hand, showing to a development team all the long-term strategic goals for the next 5 years, also probably not going to go very well. So choosing which level of granularity you're going to present to the different audiences, how you're going to show and tell that story to kind of have that alignment as a team, and the sorts of things you put on there. You need multiple views. You need to understand that we've got to stop asking it to do every job. Like a release plan with dates on it for particular features is another artifact that sits next to it. We combine them thinking we're being efficient, we're making our lives easier, but instead what we end up doing is making a tool that does both jobs badly instead of one job well.
The roadmap shouldn't be all things to all people.
Exactly. It's an articulation of a bunch of decisions or things that decisions that we've either made or are thinking of making in the future, and we're figuring out.
So let me run through something. I like what you were saying. Don't get me wrong. I think it should be all things to all people. It's an articulation of a bunch of decisions. It's an alignment tool. It's something that we can all work upon. It's a conversation starter. Much like, when you go back to before Agile was really shit, and people spoke about user stories and the 3 Cs. The user stories are about having a conversation, about talking about actually what's going to confirm that we've done the thing that you would want it to do, like it's solved your problem. And then actually that's just kind of write an overview of that story on a card. Right? Roadmaps are similar to that. Let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what we kind of think we need to do along the way, and let's just kind of get it written down somewhere so we've got something we can look at and talk about in the future when it does change. And I think that thing gets lost. So going back to I suppose one of the challenges with a lot of agile environments is that they're not product environments. Not in the same way that an actual product company that have come from the ground up as a product company with a strong product mindset, with good product leadership, who are making different kinds of promises to their investors, to their shareholders, to their senior leadership teams. There's a distinct difference between the traditional firm who never had had basically grew a tech function and had the business and everything else on one side, and a product company where maybe it's all slightly more harmonious as a whole. And Agile really, took hold in those tech functions of organizations where tech was a bolt-on and they were just supplying to a demand from the business.
Yeah.
So in those types of contexts, we're saying that roadmap shouldn't be all things to all people. When you have agile coaches, scrum masters, or people working in those agile environments and they're producing roadmaps which are just lists of features or Gantt charts, do you think that's because that's what the environment is demanding of them? And if so, what can people do to help maybe shift that a little bit? What's a small experiment they could run?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Well, that's why I talk about content maturity. I also talk about timing maturity for your time on your roadmap, because if you try to go from this Gantt chart feature-based thing to the all singing, all dancing, perfect world in one step, the organization's going to melt down overnight. So we've got to be pragmatic about how do we take a stepwise approach. For example, do we change the timing but keep features? You're still going to upset some people, but if we keep features but change the timing, maybe we go from a pure timeline dates to time boxes, maybe quarters, half years, full years, ultimately to more of a time frame viewpoint of now, next, and later. Although I'll be straight with you, I don't use now, next, and later anymore. I use discover, so deliver, discover, and explore. So those kind of activity types that I talked about, because one of the issues I find with now, next, and later, I'm going a sidebar here, is it talks to now, we're going to do something else later, and we do next, and then something else later. The reality is the things in each of those further columns we are working on right now. We're just doing different things on them. So we're delivering something, probably, and we know the feature in the now column. So why not call it delivery? We've got things in the next column that we are understanding, discovering. Well, why not call it discovery then? In the later, we're exploring to find those problems and bigger things. So let's call it exploration instead, as an example. So I tend to shift that nomenclature. But then, so that's kind of the timing, shall we say, communication of because we know that things that we're going to explore are going to come out of the organization much later. So that's why it ties into later. But in the same vein, we think about how do we mature that content. Now, we might stick with features for a very long time until we get to a time frame model. But then we might start maturing the content that we're putting in there. Do we shift to outcomes? And then we've got the debate of what the heck's an outcome? So traditionally, people, when they talk about an outcome, often they really mean a product outcome, and by that they mean a change of customer behavior. I may be reducing churn or something like that. As great as a goal, that's more of an OKR level thing for me. But I want more detail. And in particular, if I'm ever going to share this with a customer, which there's a whole other controversial subject, do you share roadmaps with the customer? My answer is yes, by the way. Putting reduced churn on there, the customer doesn't care. It doesn't inform them about anything. What they want to know is, how are you going to help them? How are you going to make their life better? So there's another form of outcomes. So user outcomes, jobs to be done. That's what I shift to putting on my roadmap. I'm going to solve this problem for the customer. I'm going to enable this thing. I'm going to enable them to do something. And by doing that, one, usually my customers are pretty happy because they can see how I'm going to help them. And two, it's specific enough for my organization to know which direction we're going. But what it's not doing is boxing us in. It's like saying, we are going to ship this particular feature. Well, what if we do our discovery, we suddenly realize that there's a better way of solving that? As long as we solve the problem, we deliver the user outcome, who cares?
It's what I find really interesting, and I have to admit, me and a lady called Liz Immer did a live stream a little while ago, and it wasn't until this week I realised that we were coming at it from slightly different angles, because I was indoctrinated into outcomes, I would say, by a guy called Gojko Adzik.
I know Gojko. I was with him 2 weeks ago in Krakow.
There you go, legendary chap. And he's actually coming on the podcast. He's booked in for August, and I haven't seen Gojko for a long, long time. I remember the first big talk I did at a conference, I was on at the same time as him. And my case study was a little bit of it was about how I worked with him on something. And I remember going up to him saying, I can't believe this is my moment, and I'm up against you doing your whole South Park Gnomes thing, which he does. And I was like, gosh, this is shit. he was like, he said, I'm upset because I want to come and see your talk. And I was like, that's very nice of you to say. And I think it's bullshit. I don't think you really want to come and see my talk. Regardless, we both got plenty of people. It was okay. But I was introduced to it via spec by example, but then after that, really, something called impact mapping.
Yep.
And when we talk about impact mapping, and this is the thing that me and Liz really struggled to tally off, square off, and I can now do that, is that in the outcome in impact mapping is something which will make, save, or protect the organization's money. And it's actually a thing, and you're saying kind of what, hopefully going for your target and your break-even points. And it's a real tangible thing. It's something you can go to the business and say, this, we are going to make, save, or protect money because we're doing this. And it's something really tangible. Right. But then when we talk about the actual changes in user behavior, they're the impacts. Well, not even user behavior, an actor behavior, because it's more broader than just for users. We're saying anything whose behavior needs to change in order for us to reach that outcome, or we hypothesize that behavior needs to change, they're an actor. So that could be another system, it could be a customer, it could be a stakeholder, it could be anything, it could be an operations person, just not filling in a form differently, and it's not using a fax machine anymore, whatever it might be. But they were the impacts. I mean, when you look at lean UX, for example, which I think is where lots of people have got their understanding of outcomes, the outcome is the change in behavior.
Yeah.
And I think it's this weird mix. So I wonder, when we look at, people might be listening, trying to tally it all off. And I think the important thing we're talking about here is behaviors will have to change in order for us to have an impact on the business. And what goes on the roadmap? Is it the impact on the business? Is it the way we're going to make, save, or protect money? Or is it the changes, the desired changes or hypothesized changes in user behavior? Or is it the things we're going to produce, which then we believe will create that change in behavior? Talk about content mix. How do you mix that content together?
So the answer is yes. Or it depends.
Oh, shut up. You're always plugging your book, Phil. I'm tired of it.
But every product person says that. Literally, I say the weekend I announced the title at an event, we were counting how many times people said that phrase.
Yeah. Well, do you know what I mean? Before product people, man, it was consultants. That was the consultancy thing. I think it might have been, I don't know. Most of the quotes about consultancy come from a guy called Jerry Weinberg. I'm sure I need to go back and consult
one
some
of his
my books
over there.
Yeah, Jerry Weinberg was. If you have listeners, if you haven't checked out any of Jerry Weinberg's book, check them out. He was a phenomenal, I want to say thought leader, but I don't think that does him justice. He was a fantastic author and an amazing mind. And I do check out Jerry Weinberg's book, particularly The Secrets of Consulting.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, wonderful book. The Law of Raspberry Jam came from there. So anyway, Phil, carry on.
But interesting that kind of different terminology. Language can be the thing that breaks us. I remember having a long debate in the room when I was a product leader of what was a vision, what was a mission, and there was almost like a flip from each side of the pond. Like the Americans had it one way around, the Brits had it another way around, and that led to a 2-hour debate. It's like, I don't care what we call it, let's focus on the content. So I tend to think of that kind of scale, and I think in Lean UX, Jeff and Josh, I kind of use the same language that I tend to use, of impact being the business level metric, outcome being the product level metric or the change of customer behavior, output being the thing that you ship, like a feature. I like to add on inputs, the level below that of because sometimes you set those as objectives, they're not necessarily ideal, but interview 5 customers a month. It's not what you actually care about, but sometimes it's a great way to build behaviors in the organization. And kind of thinking about those as kind of the different levels that you can measure is useful. I would say anything from the output to the impact can go on a roadmap, and it depends on the audience. If I'm presenting to an exec, an impact level metric may well be there because I want to show the business connection. If I'm not talking to an exec, then I might just limit it to product level metrics of change of customer behavior, because those are typically the OKRs that the team have that they're driving towards. But even if I'm showing a short-term view, maybe the now column, I might have the outputs on there as well, the features we're going to ship, because we have certainty at that level. below even the outputs of the change of customer behavior, I want to show the user outcomes coming from the jobs to be done world of this is the thing I'm going to enable a customer to do.
It reminds me, what you're saying, of the classic kind of backlog funnel, which was very popular in the Scrum world for a long time, saying that your backlog should be like a funnel, and you want things to be small enough to kind of fall through the funnel by the point you're going to work on them. So the kind of the very top of the neck of the funnel was when you're going to begin doing the work, and everything above that is quite coarse grained. And this, what I find interesting is, you can flip that on its side, and then you've got often kind of teach people to achieve flow with the work that's coming into their backlog to kind of lay out the stages. And like you were saying, for a roadmap, kind of left to right, so that's how it goes onto your backlog, and that's how it goes out. What I find interesting about backlogs is that it kind of almost reverses that flow, because when you think of flow, generally speaking, it's kind of the work goes from left to right, and then the further it gets to the right, the closer it is then to get into the customer's hands. Roadmaps are different. Actually, the left side is the stuff that's closest to the customer's hands, and the right hand, which is furthest away. And I wonder if that creates some kind of cognitive hoops for people to jump through. I don't know.
I know. But let me tell you this. Not all roadmaps need to go left to right either.
Get out of here.
Yeah. So
no.
Breaking that cognitive model is actually super powerful. One of my most loved formats is what I call a radio roadmap. It's concentric circles. Time goes from the middle out to the outside. And I discovered this a couple of years ago as part of the interviews on the YouTube channel. And at first it was like, oh, I don't quite get that. And then I realized that was its power. It created some friction in understanding, which could have to pause and think to really understand. And that made them understand better. And it's actually turned into, now I use the phrase, it's on our radar instead of it's on our roadmap, if I'm using that view, because it's kind of that view. And so you have limited space in the middle for the things you're doing now, and far more space for the things in the extreme outside, because they're on your radar. You're not necessarily doing anything with them or kind of going to do something about all of them, but you're aware of them. For example, if you look at market trends, because that might also go on your roadmap, the why that you're doing things. You haven't figured out the how or the what yet. So it's kind of flipping that, and there's the radial. We also have the crawler, so it looks a bit like a Star Wars kind of start of the movie. You can do roadmap in that style, about left to right. And that's one of the issues I have with the now, next, and later roadmap, because there are things in the far right-hand side. It's the further away from the customer getting it, but it's being worked on. And that mental model breaks down. So sometimes I flip that on its side and turn them into swim lanes to communicate the parallel activities. Basically.
I always find it hard to relate to stuff from the far right, because it's just so far out of the distance. And I think having things as a swim lane, or just as a flow, right? So you can see how things are flowing through, I think is just such a more conducive way. And you were talking about showing the radar, the circles. I think that part of the reason I think it's useful is because it relates to something called the ladder of inference. Have you heard of this?
Sounds familiar, but not coming to mind.
By a gentleman called Chris Agris, and I think it was first published in the 5th Discipline Field Book, which I had a dream about the other day. Go figure. It's a very cheap book. It's a very good book. But what it talks about, ladder inference, which is, whenever we're taking the world through a lens, and we only pick from the pool of observable data the stuff which we recognize and has meaning to us. But because we're already picking the stuff which we recognize when we see something, we rocket through this ladder of assumptions and beliefs, and basically just reconfirm what we already see. It's kind of like confirmation bias. So when you're showing a roadmap, which is kind of 1, 2, 3, or something along those lines, which people are familiar with, they're going to look at it. They're going to rocket up the ladder of inference. They're only going to pick up the stuff which they think is already true, and then they're going to ignore a lot of the stuff which actually could be really useful to them. So if you show them that same content, but in a different structure, they're having to engage the higher functions of their brain to really try and understand what it is they're looking at. And as a consequence, as long as you kind of really get them engaged in the decision-making process and the understanding of it, then hopefully they can leave a better understanding. So if we think about this, then roadmaps being a way to have conversations and make decisions, if you were thinking about that decision-making process and you're faced with a situation where you have to create a roadmap or recreate a roadmap, right? You can choose a context you like, but how would you see that decision-making process from kind of starting from not a lot to having a roadmap which people were collectively saying, yeah, okay, this is good enough for today? Like, what is that process for you?
I mean, so for me, decision making always breaks down into 3 stages. There's getting to the decision, making the decision, and implementing the decision. And I always emphasize the implementing, because no matter what decision you think you made in the room, if you leave and do something different, there was a reality of a different decision. And that, I think, most people, when they talk about decision making, forget about. So I always like to emphasize. The getting to, I think, in this particular example is the key thing. A lot of it comes down to gathering context, like bringing as much information together as possible. Like, what is our strategy? What are our objectives? What principles have we got? What market do we play in? Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? What's happening externally? What timings out there in the market? Because there are always cycles and events. What are our technical capabilities? What's our financial runway? What's the size of our team, etc., etc. All that's part of the problem why it's hard, because there are so many things that need feeding in, and often a lot of that is treated as almost tacit knowledge. You just assume it's in someone's head, as opposed to explicitly gathering it together to make that decision. And if you're making a big decision of a new roadmap, then you need to actually spend a lot of time on gathering that context. Now, hopefully it's articulated to a fair degree in your strategy. But actually, half the time, that's just kind of AWOL. You haven't got a strategy. There's nothing there that's actually able to inform those choices, because I think it's Jana Bastow that says a roadmap is a prototype for your strategy. It's really about saying, how do we bridge from these big bets, this big direction that we have decided as an organization we're going to take, to what we can actually deliver. And so strategy becomes that key part of informing it, which should have been built around an understanding of the market context, etc., etc. But also, then you need to bring in elements of, what are we capable of doing technologically? And what is the current state of the art? I think Marty Kagan uses the phrase in ways that are just now possible when he talks about product work, because the reality is the state of the art technologically moves on. And so the thing you had on your roadmap for a year down the line, the better way of doing it has suddenly turned up. Like, everyone had AI on their roadmap 3 years out for the last 5 years. And then all of a sudden, a year ago, it's like, we need to pull this in. Now, hopefully the organization were already doing some capability building and exploring what they could do with it. Don't think many were, but hopefully they were. And then you start to be able to say, right, now this is now possible. We understand what we can do. But that takes time and investment. Too many teams are actually just focused on shipping stuff, not doing, so they're doing the D part of R&D. And actually you need that R part to be coming in and informing, bringing the technologists in. A roadmap is too often treated as just the product manager's artifact. It's not. The roadmap is the team's artifact. If it doesn't belong to the team holistically and they don't take ownership of it, it's guaranteed to fail.
Like, during early days of COVID, I ended up in
Another
hospital.
Black Swan event.
I love that. I miss lockdown just a little bit. What I don't miss, though, is the fact that I ended up in hospital at 2 a.m. with heart problems.
Yeah, I don't think I'd miss that. I miss it a little bit too, because there was a lot more time with my daughter.
Yeah, and that was the lovely side of it. But do you know what? I mean, I ended up it was 2 a.m. They wanted to phone an ambulance to come and get me. They wouldn't let me go on my own because my heart was malfunctioning, basically. And they rushed me to hospital. I went in there and got rigged up and got tested and everything else. And they said I had something called a sinus arrhythmia, some kind of heart thing. And they asked me some questions. And they said, have you been drinking excessively? And I'm like, fuck yeah, because shit's really stressful. I've just started a business and there's a massive global pandemic. Are you drinking lots of coffee? I'm like, hell yeah, I'm drinking lots of coffee because I'm always hungover. And like, so you're feeling quite stressed? I'm like, yep. are you exercising at all? I was like, nope. And they're like, you got to sort that out, Ben. Otherwise, you're just going to be back in here. And I was like, okay. Not drinking as much coffee, not drinking as much booze, exercising more, always on the roadmap. They were always a bit further out into the distance, far enough for me not to have to worry about them. But the day I ended up in hospital and it became real was the day I thought, no, actually, now this needs to move into my deliver section, my now section, because I can't afford to do that. And I think that when we look at the psychological aspect of this is, I believe, what they would call hyperbolic discounting, which is we will always devalue something which is more valuable the further off it is into the distance, the less it is a real problem to solve now. And we'll always value more highly the things which are probably easier and closer to us. So going to the gym doesn't pay off, so I devalue it. It takes a long time of exercising, going to the gym to see the effects that you want to see. So we just give up. And it's much easier for me to be like, nah, do you know what? I'll just have that glass of vodka.
It looks like water.
Yeah, it looks like what no one will know. You know, I'm on a podcast, no one knows what's in the cup. But yeah, but it's true. We will always discount things. I think that's part of the problem with road mapping, is that stuff will pop up and stuff will seem urgent, and then the decision will be, there won't be a decision-making process. That's a fire that's burning. That's something we think is more valuable now. This is what the customer has asked for. This is what we've gone off and sold. So let's do that now, because that thing we're saying over there, that does not seem as valuable now as just doing this now. And then all of a sudden, AI is a real thing. We're like, oh shit, actually, we should have really done that too. So let's bring it in now. And then what's the roadmap is meaningless, right? Because people are just discounting the stuff in the future.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that churn when you're just kind of stuck in that kind of washing machine of the now, and you can't ever seem to get to the stuff that's later?
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the classic kind of, should we say, memes of road mapping of, we'll just update the roadmap. So we'll do the new version. And I advocate for that being like a monthly thing, and all they ever do is shift it a month to the right.
Yeah,
and we didn't actually do anything that was on it. We've just moved everything that was on it to the right. Part of it comes down to not overloading what we're trying to do now, like actually being honest with ourselves in terms of capacity and what we're focusing on. Part of it comes down to, well, if these things are coming out of left field that we don't expect, particularly from customers and generally from the market, then we are not doing our job right. We're not getting out there and understanding the market. It should be the exception, not the rule, that these things come out and derail things. That's the whole reason that products and discovery work exists, is to not get, surprised by these things. Yes, there are going to be black swan events, COVID, OpenAI launching to an extent. Maybe it's not black swan because it's not so necessarily so negative, but it's an exceptional event that was hard to predict. And so there are always going to be things like that, and we've got to have the ability to react and respond and change things. But getting ahead of ourselves and actually really genuinely, if something is on that, has made it onto that roadmap, it should be something that we absolutely believe is valuable. And if we absolutely believe is valuable, it should be tied into the objectives that we have as an organization. And if we're then not achieving those objectives, or if we're not delivering it and still achieving those objectives, why was it there? And if we're not achieving them, then we've got to have a hard conversation with ourselves about we're not doing the right things. We're making poor priority calls. I mean, it's interesting. I've got a lot of conversations about decision-making obviously happening at the moment. And a lot of the time, they end up going down just the prioritization path. And I start asking myself, it's like, for me, decision-making is a much broader church. But if people limited decisions to just priorities of, should I do X or Y, or should I just do X, or should I not do X, or should I do X? And I think there's a much bigger perspective of what is our overall direction, our strategy, what are the goals that we're going to measure ourselves by, and then did we make good decisions? In fact, that's giving away the secret fourth stage to decision making. That's only in the conclusion. It's reviewing the decision quality. Like, did we make a good choice? And if we didn't, then how do we improve our decision making going forward? How do we make better choices? Yes, there will be times when you're going to take that deal and implement that feature. In fact, my favorite model there is Radical Dutt's radical product thinking, where you're thinking about the survivability versus the vision. Like sometimes you're going to take a compromise on your vision because you need the cash to keep going, or for some other reason, like survivability in your organization might be getting to the next funding round and looking attractive and therefore being profitable, as opposed to necessarily needing the cash to survive per se. And so making that choice and that trade-off is super powerful, and it needs to happen. I'm working with an ed tech company at the moment. I'm sure if Harvard turned up and says, we need this feature, they'd do it. But there's a very good reason. It'd give them a lighthouse customer that would then help them sell more deals and focus on their core, and they'd probably pay them a pretty penny as well. It's got lots of positives. So it's just this hard. That's the reason why product work is hard, because we're constantly making all those choices, and the expectation that you can foresee them all is never going to work. And I know that's back to that first question. That's part of the root of why many people from the Agile community say, well, just don't bother wasting your time on it. The thing is, I don't find that roadmaps are a huge amount of time. They're an articulation of our direction of travel. And if I spend more than half an hour a month on a roadmap as a product person, I feel I'm doing something wrong, because the decisions that ultimately create it are things I need to make throughout the month anyway.
Yeah. Do you know what makes it hard, I think, for people? And I'd say I could go out to my Agile friends here who are working in these tech organizations that are trying to be more product-like, is that if you're in the culture that predominantly cares about velocity and output, then road mapping will take a long time, and it will never be right. And it will just be a list of what you're delivering and when. I think road mapping is infinitely easier if we're able to say, next 6 weeks, this is the impact/business outcome we're trying to achieve. Are the things that we are doing getting us closer to that, or not closer to that? So my wife was just...
No worries. Here's two spicy takes on that. One, well, part of that is because Agile has been reduced to a delivery mechanism when it's so much more than that. And as a product person, not a pure Agilist, I know that. Its goal is to learn quickly, deliver quickly, but deliver the right thing quickly. And we seem to have lost that aspect. We focus on the output. And then there's the other aspect. Product teams seem to get held to this, let's ship X on Y day. And it's an unfair sort of measure. And it's usually the sales team that are the ones who are giving you hassle to make sure you do that. We don't hold sales to the yardstick. We say to sales, sell X amount of products in this period of time, i.e. drive this outcome in this amount by this date. We're just asking for the same thing. Give us an outcome to drive. Hold us to that. Instead of, the challenge I sometimes give to the sales organization when they start pushing for a feature on a date is, I will do that if you'll guarantee you'll close this particular deal on this particular date. If you want to be held to if you want comparability, you want to be held to the same standard, cool. If you'll work the same way, then I will. But how about instead we both recognize that the outcome is the thing that matters. Let's hold ourselves to that standard.
And that's the thing. I think the alignment on that outcome is hard when to deal with the necessary or perhaps unnecessary complexity in your organization. You've broken products or services or whatever it may be down into nice, easy to manage pieces. And as a consequence, there's no focus. And as a consequence, you're spending lots of money trying to bring it all together. And as a consequence, sales can go off and sell what they like to who they like in whatever way they like, because you're bringing a roadmap together when you are kind of broken down in that way. And add insult to injury, things are very output focused. Creating a holistic roadmap, which is really focused on the right outcomes for the business, just isn't possible, I don't think. And this is the work we're doing, me and a friend of mine, Saloni, on product operating engagement models, which are called product OEM.
I'm going to agree with you saying it's not possible. I'm just going to say it's hard.
Yeah, it depends what scale. Like, it's not possible as things are. Like, I think I would say that, at least based on my experience, like when you have things that are broken down into little pieces which are easy to manage, invariably what that means is that they're going to lose customer focus, so they're going to be more technically oriented, and people are going to be looking on kind of delivering the output because they want the output to deliver. And I think the culture, I know maybe it's not impossible, maybe it is hard, but like it is. It's a difficult
I think what you're talking about is one of the dysfunctions that's there, of the assumption we try and reduce knowledge work, like developing products, to a Taylorist model of production. So someone at the top breaks it down, works out exactly what to deliver into all these things, then we get down to the bottom, and there we have the features to ship for the team, as opposed to enabling, descaling the work to the team is driving the outcome, instead of someone at the top deciding this is how we're going to deliver that outcome.
Yeah, but this is Taylorism is a choice, right? It's a perception. It's an easy one. But this is what Peter Senge wrote about at length in The Fifth Discipline, is that as humans, in order to wrap our heads around things, we'll always break it down. A gentleman I know called Andrew Kakabadze has spent the last 25 years researching board behaviour and organisational behaviour, and written, it's something insane about a book, 20-odd books on the topic. And he will say, and I agree with him, you're always going to have silos. We're always going to have to break things down. The question isn't, should we not break them down? The question is, what mindset can we use to break them down? And then you're right, that Taylorist approach, when we're striving for best practice, when we're looking for efficiency, like we'll do things based on what makes sense. And I think one of the challenges is that the thing that makes sense to people, well, let me rephrase that a little bit. The people that are charged with then how to break things down are the people in the more technology-focused way, and the way that it makes sense for technology people to break things down is by the technical architecture, not by the customer need, customer demand, the trends. And then you end up in this situation where it's really easy to break down the tech by the architecture, and then have lots of handoffs and lots of small little focused things which are just like on getting the output done, rather than a much more healthier way is actually, well, no, what are the customer, what are our markets, what do our customers want, what binds them together, and let's design an organization in the customer perspective, not in the technical perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know we were talking about team topologies before we came on, and like we're getting into that space and things like Conway's law and stuff like that. And I remember a client sort of talking at length about how they were doing a reverse Conway maneuver to kind of reorganize their structure. And then what I saw was a very component-oriented structure. It's like, actually, you've just trying to change the lines of the components, not actually breaking them, not putting that customer-centric overview.
Yeah. Well,
I wanted to just come back a second to something we said earlier. We're talking about people wanting those outcomes or those outputs. Particular sales team. One of the kind of successful ways I've found to break that is, or actually step back a second, what they're really looking for is something to talk about with the customer, to go in and have the conversation that enables them to win a deal, because ultimately that's where they exist. Well, usually that's because we've for so many years launched features. So we'd go and talk about, we've got this feature. This is our excuse to go and talk to a customer. So that focuses everything on the outputs. Well, there's another way, and so that leads to a launch, which is feature centric. The alternative way is to instead launch maybe a little later, but be talking about the benefits. So going through like EAP programs, early access programs, and really validating that it's delivering the value. And then the message isn't, we've just delivered this. The messages have all this value today, so you can get these benefits today. It slows things down a little bit as you make the transition, because you've got to move from the feature I'll ship today to now, okay, the validated benefit they're going to get a little bit later. But once you start to make that switch, you've got a more powerful marketing message. You've got an easier message for them to go, and they're less focused about getting the feature. It's like, what value can I tell them they're going to get? All of a sudden, you're into solving the problems for customers. And that's the enabler for the conversation. And that can help flip that conversation with the sales team as well for that push for outputs.
I agree, man. I think this is something which, I think I mentioned Jeff and Josh a lot because I spent a week with them, but, they've been banging on about this since day one. the respond element of what we do, being able to look at what's gone out and validate or explore, and then be able to make decisions based upon, was our hypotheses how correct? How close were we? What have we now discovered? That respond element, I think it was always supposed to have been there. But I think people just got into this idea that it's about delivery, and let's just get it delivered, when actually it's about kind of delivering it, which I think is a weird one, like a postman. But then also, then how do you respond? How do you know that they've opened the letter, they've read the letter? What do they think of the letter? Was it what they wanted? Was it useful? And that whole element, that is another episode. Maybe we can talk about another time, Phil, because our time is up, unfortunately.
Well, I'm just going to say, you mentioned Jeff and Josh a few times. You mentioned your Lean UX. My absolute favorite book for product people to read is actually their other book, Sense and Respond. I recommend that to everybody from a mindset perspective about product work.
And nice, I've got it open here, actually. It's on my tabs of things to read. Jeff and Josh are launching Sense and Respond Learning, and they're going to be doing much more about their books and helping people learn about their books. So people do check out Sense and Respond by Jeff Gothelf and Josh Seiden on recommendation of Phil. And if you like it, let Phil know on LinkedIn. If you don't like it, let Phil know on LinkedIn. Or do you know what? If you just want to talk to Phil and ask him any questions about anything that we've spoken about, then Phil, they can contact you on LinkedIn, I understand.
Absolutely, yeah.
Phil, thank you very much for taking this time on this lovely Friday morning to talk to me. You're in Sheffield in the UK. I'm in the southeast, so there's a big geographical distance. But over the last hour, 50-odd minutes recording this and beforehand, I feel like I got to know you a little bit, and it's been lovely. So thank you very much for taking this time.
It's been a pleasure.
Have you got any other places in LinkedIn you want to push people towards to learn more about you?
If people want to try talkingroadmaps.com, then that would be a great place to check out the podcast and all the stuff on road mapping. Alternatively, if they're interested in the book and maybe want to join the early reader program, they can go to theitdependsbook.com, and there's a sign-up link there.
Awesome. Well, we'll do our best to get those links in the show notes. And people do check out both those websites. I think Phil, I think you're on a great thread here of the decision-making element, and I can't wait to learn more. So thank you very much, Phil, and everyone, thank you for listening. Do let us know what you thought of this episode or any previous episodes on LinkedIn or TikTok. If you're going to do it on TikTok, make sure you put a really inflammatory comment, because that's what people seem to enjoy doing. But please do let us know what you think and what you like and loathe about this podcast is supremely important to me. So please do let me know. Phil, thank you very much for coming on. Everyone, thank you very much for listening. This is the Product Agility Podcast.
Thanks, everyone. Make some good decisions.